You've probably heard the term public policy thrown around on the news or by politicians, right? We all kind of nod along, but what does it actually mean? It's this invisible force that shapes almost everything in our lives, from the quality of our roads to the taxes that come out of our paychecks. So let's pull back the curtain and figure out what's really going on.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What are we actually talking about when we say public policy? It sounds super complicated and academic, but the core idea, it's actually way more straightforward than you might think.
And there it is. Boom. This is probably the sharpest, most powerful definition out there from a political scientist named Thomas Dye. The key words there are chooses and not to do. See, policy isn't just about passing a new law. Sometimes the biggest policy decision is choosing to do absolutely nothing.
All right, so to really get what that simple sentence means, here's our roadmap. We're going to dig into the core definition, meet the players in the game, check out the 4 main flavors of policy, see how these decisions actually get made, and then, most importantly, we're going to see why this is a crucial toolkit for you to understand the world. So let's start there with the core definition. The big takeaway is that public policy is never an accident. It's always an intentional, deliberate choice a government makes to try and solve some kind of problem that's affecting all of us.
Okay, to put it a little more formally, policy is how a government turns its goals into actual programs and real-world results. And I want to hammer this home. When a government knows about a huge problem, say traffic congestion or air pollution, and actively decides not to act, that's not an oversight. That is a policy choice, and it has very, very real consequences for everyone.
Now, it's easy to hear the word government and picture this one single giant building making all the decisions. But the reality, it's way more interesting. It's more like a giant arena, a game with a ton of different players all trying to push and pull the final outcome in their direction.
And you can basically split all these players into 2 major teams. You've got the people who are officially part of the government structure, and then you've got everyone on the outside trying to influence what happens from there.
So on the official team, you've got the executive branch. Think the president and all the government ministries. They're the ones usually proposing the policies. Then you have the legislator, like Congress, who has to approve the laws and, crucially, control the money. The courts, they're like the referees, making sure the laws are being interpreted correctly. And you cannot forget the bureaucracy, all the public servants who are on the ground actually making these policies happen. But here's where it gets really fun, because the players on the outside can be just as powerful, if not more so. You've got interest groups and unions lobbying hard for what they want. You've got the media, which has huge power to decide which problems we all pay attention to. Political parties, of course, are there to package up all these ideas for voters. And then you have organized civil society. We're talking everything from nonprofits to huge social movements, all working to make the public's voice heard.
All right, so have you ever noticed how a debate over building a new local bridge is pretty tame, but the second someone mentions changing the tax code, it's like a political bomb goes off? Well, that's not random. It all comes down to the specific type of policy we're talking about.
And the guy who just nailed this idea was political scientist Theodore Lowy. He came up with this brilliant little phrase, policy makes politics. His whole point was that the nature of the policy itself actually determines how big and nasty the political fight is going to be. And he broke it all down into 4 main types.
First up, you've got distributive policies. The easiest way to think about these is like the government is just handing out slices of pie. They give a very specific benefit, like, say, a subsidy for the farming industry or a contract to build a new highway in one specific state to a small, concentrated group. The cost is spread so thinly across millions and millions of taxpayers that nobody even notices. The result? Almost zero political conflict. Everyone's happy.
Next up, regulatory policies. Now, these aren't about giving things away. They're about setting the rules of the road. Think about environmental protection laws, or something like Brazil's famous Lei Seca, which crack down on drinking and driving. Here, the conflict is super direct. You have a clear face-off between the group being regulated, like a factory that has to install new filters, and the group that benefits, which is usually the public as a whole.
And that brings us to the main event, redistributive policies. These are the heavyweights. This is where the real political fireworks happen, because these policies are designed to explicitly take resources from one very large group and give them to another. We're talking about things like a progressive income tax system or big social welfare programs like Bolsa Familia. The conflict here is huge. It's deeply ideological, and it often pits entire social classes against one another. It feels like a zero-sum game. For my side to win, your side has to lose.
And finally, there are constitutive policies. These are a little more meta. They're all about setting up the rules of the political game itself. So this would be things like creating a brand new government agency or making big changes to the election laws.
They basically decide how the government itself is structured and who gets to hold the power.
So when you lay it all out like this, you see this incredibly clear pattern, right? As you move down the list from just distributing goodies to actively redistributing wealth, the political temperature just goes through the roof. It is such a powerful way to understand why some debates are just so much more explosive than others.
Okay, so we know who the players are, and we know the different kinds of fights they get into. But how do these decisions actually get made? Is it a neat, orderly, logical process, or is it a whole lot messier?
Well, in an ideal world, we'd follow what's called the rational model. This is the textbook version. A problem is clearly defined, policymakers gather all the possible data, they carefully weigh every single alternative, and then they just choose the most efficient solution. It's clean, it's scientific, it's very logical.
But the reality, well, the reality often looks a lot more like something called the garbage can model. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Imagine a big garbage can where all the players are just tossing things in randomly. You've got problems that are looking for a solution, you've got pet solutions that are looking for a problem to attach to, and you've got decision makers who are just looking for something to do. A policy decision only happens when, by pure chance, a problem, a solution, and the right players all happen to collide at the exact same moment. It's less about logic and way more about timing, chaos, and a little bit of luck.
So, look, why should you care about all these definitions and these weird models? Is this just an academic exercise? No way. It's because all of this gives you an incredibly powerful toolkit for making sense of the headlines you read and the world you see every single day.
Seriously, with this toolkit, you can basically become a policy decoder. You can start to spot the real players pulling the strings behind a headline. You'll instantly understand why that tax debate is a political firestorm. You'll recognize that most policies aren't some grand, logical master plan, but usually just a messy, chaotic compromise. It gives you a whole new level of clarity.
So I'll leave you with this question. The next time you see a news story about a government decision, or maybe even a non-decision, just pause for a second. Think about who the players are. Ask yourself what flavor of policy it is. And remember the messy, garbage can reality behind it all. Now that you have the tools, which policies that shape your own life will you start to see in a completely different light?